Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Amit, for giving me an opportunity to come here. And thank you, Franchise India, for calling me. I have to admit that I'm not an intellectual who deals with higher education. Neither am I a policymaker. Neither am I an expert on higher education. But I think where I come from is that I'm an entrepreneur who's deeply passionate about education. And what I'm going to be talking about is largely my experiences through the ventures that we created in so to say highlighting what the opportunity for education could be in the next 5 to 10 years. Most of my experiences in education started when we started an organization called Jamboree, where we largely just help students to apply abroad for higher education. And some of the experiences that really touched me along this journey are also reflective of what is happening in our higher education space. And just to give you an example, about 5 years ago, I was sitting with this student. Now, this student had about a 93% in class 12. And he was applying abroad. He wanted to take the SAT and also go abroad. And so he wrote the SAT. He was admitted to the University of California in Berkeley. So he's very excited. Of course, California, Berkeley is one of the top universities in the world. Of course, his parents were very worried. They didn't want to lose their only son or send that child abroad. So anyway, I think he wrote his board exams finally in class 12. His results came out. He ended up with a 93%. A 93% for this child qualified him to be in Rajdhani College in Delhi University for a BCom. So the choice was pretty stark, California, Berkeley versus a Rajdhani College. And as things would happen, ultimately I think the wish of his family really prevailed over his own desire. And this child never went abroad. And he finished his BCom here in the college he was admitted to, and then I happened to meet this child 3 years later again. And I just felt we had killed the motivation and killed the aspiration of this child. And compared to what he was in class 12, all bubbling, full of energy, I really wanted to go and study in some of the best universities in the world. And I mean, here was a child whose family could really afford him to send abroad. And there are lots of kids whose families can't afford to do that. So, the penny kind of dropped there, and I felt that as a country, probably we'd let down our students. And I firmly believe today that for a lot of our high quality students graduating out of class 12, we do not have an education for them. We do not have a high quality education for them. And now just stepping back a little bit, when we think of the word education, what are the instant words that come to our mind? So whenever we think of education, I think the two words that come to my mind instantly when you talk of education, one is teacher and the other one is student, right? And I think it's the experience of inspiration of teaching that a teacher translates to a student. I think that is really education. How inspiring can that experience be for a student? If all of us remember when we went to school or we went to college, some of the best subjects we studied or some of the best courses we remember, I think those courses or those subjects were good because the teachers who taught those courses were really good. And as we look back, at least when I look back on my college life or on my school life, I think the 2, 3, 4 teachers who I really remember were teachers who were really inspiring, teachers who were really outstanding, and you wanted to be in their class just to hear them speak. So I think really this experience or this outstanding teaching experience that a teacher translates to a student really qualifies the whole education experience to me. And while we as entrepreneurs, as policymakers, as leaders, as we try to create educational enterprises, we are really trying to define this experience. How valuable can this experience be? How does a teacher really make that student experience more worthwhile? And I think the aim of education enterprises per se has to be to try to create that experience. Now the question that happens is, how do you really measure that experience? How do you go into a class and come out and say that I had a good experience or a bad experience? And and all of us will understand that this experience is also quite instantaneous, right? So you would enter a class just like you see Sachin Tendulkar hit a six and you say, wow, right? So you enter a good class, you come out and you say, wow, this was the best class I ever attended, or ye class attend karke maza aa gaya. So that's really how you qualify, and which is what I call the wow factor. So I think this teaching experience has to be qualified by what we call, or what personally I feel should be, the wow factor. Now in trying to create our educational enterprises, I think we have to focus on creating this wow factor. We have to focus into creating this high quality teaching. I think this can qualify what are the kind of educational institutions we are creating. So I think in this backdrop, in this, so to say, in this paradigm where what education should mean, let us reflect, let's step back a little bit and see where we are as a country on higher education. We are at a gross enrollment ratio of about 18 to 19%. There is a clear target by the government that by 2020, we want to take this to a 30%. Now what would this mean? This means that we have to invest another $190 billion into our higher education system. Now that's a huge lot of investment. I mean, just as a comparison, the education outlay on the 11th plan was 16.5 billion, right? And we have to invest another 190 billion into trying to create the kind of opportunities we want to create. So clearly there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity that lot of people need to get into the higher education space. So there is clearly an opportunity here, whether for profit, not for profit, and I'm not really going into that judgment. Now, is that investment going to come from the government? Yes, for sure. I think the government will continue to invest. The government has been the highest investor in our higher education journey, but I don't think this problem can be solved by government alone. I think private sector has a large part to play. A lot of this investment will come by the private sector. A lot of this investment in the last 10 years has come by the private sector. So I think that's the first case. Clearly there is an opportunity here where investment is required. Now, do we have the market? Clearly there is an opportunity, but do we have the market? Are we willing to pay for that high quality education? And I personally feel, yes, there is a market. The bulk of our country still remains poor. But you also see a dichotomy when you see almost 100,000 students going for higher education abroad every year. And each of this student is spending anywhere between 10 to 20 lakhs per year. So clearly there's a category which needs free education or education which is subsidized. But I think there's clearly a category, and enough of that, which can also pay for high quality education. So clearly there's a market which is willing to pay. Now, is there a regulatory mechanism? Is there a regulatory mechanism possible which can, so to say, fix this gap between demand and supply? And on that note also, I think I'm happy to report that in the last 8 to 10 years, while our central government was still steeped in bureaucracy and not too much change happened, I think a lot of these state governments moved very quickly. Today, I think you have some very great pieces of legislation which allow private universities to be set up. The Haryana legislation, I feel, is quite outstanding. Rajasthan has a great act which allows private universities to be set up. And I'm really not going into the government territory because that's not a territory I know. I think enough gets talked about that. There are enough times when we really do government bashing, so I'm really not getting into that territory. I'm kind of trying to restrict myself to what the private sector can do. So there's an opportunity, there is a market. and there is a regulatory mechanism. There might not be a regulatory mechanism in every state, in every city, but I think when you look at Haryana, you look at Rajasthan, you look at some other states, there's clearly a regulatory mechanism where you can create institutions of higher learning. You can create private universities. Haryana today has almost 17 private universities. Rajasthan has a large number. I won't know the exact number, but they have a fairly large number of private universities. So there is a regulatory mechanism. This mechanism also gives a lot of freedom. It gives a lot of autonomy. It gives a lot of freedom for private people to operate. Then what are the challenges? And so in this environment, when there is an opportunity, there is a market, there is a regulatory mechanism, where are we really stuck then? Here I think it's really the way our higher education system has been brought up, what I really call the mindset issue, both in the government and in the private sector. So if you look at the Haryana Act, for example, which I feel is very progressive. Now, how do you qualify to become a university? You qualify to become a university if you have 20 acres of land. You qualify to become a university if you build 1 lakh square feet area. You qualify to become a university if you set up 3 departments. Fair enough, I think these are important considerations. But there is no mention of what is the quality of faculty you are going to have. There is no mention of any qualitative parameter. As a result of which, if you have the money, if you can buy the 20-acre land, if you can get the 1 lakh square feet building going, you can set up a university. But on the other hand, you could be a great intellectual with a great idea, but if you can't buy that 20-acre or set up that 1 lakh square feet, you can't set up a college or a university. So I think all our criteria are very heavily loaded on very quantitative parameters like land, building, numbers, right? And maybe the government is right in a certain way. They want a certain category of people coming in. But I think the criteria, and going back to my earlier part of my talk where I say that that education has to be defined by that high quality classroom experience. So there is no mention of that high quality classroom experience in the quantitative indicators that the government is asking. So clearly the approach is very, very quantitative based. It is not quality based. The result of which is for us to see. We have tons of private colleges here today. We have tons of private universities here. Most of them are struggling to fill seats. So in a nutshell, they are really lacking on the quality parameter. The second really is around an ability to innovate on curriculum. I think that's really been the shortcoming of our regulatory framework. So for example, and just to give one example, the UGC still does not allow you to give a master's degree if you have a 1-year course. I think the world has really moved beyond this. I mean, if you look at courses today across top universities in the world, you can do a master's degree in a year as long as you're fulfilling certain class and academic criteria. So even though our private universities are coming up, they require you to follow the UGC norms, and UGC norms to that extent are still rooted in a fair amount of traditionality. So I think this quantitative mindset, this issue with really being able to innovate, these are some regulatory frameworks on the part of the government. I think where the private sector, so to say, is to blame is that the private sector enters this space with the wrong mindset. So you acquire 20 acres, you build a 1 lakh square feet. So you really are going with a business mindset where faculty or teacher is a cost, right? It's a cost head. It's not the core, or it does not stand at the core of education, which is defining the classroom experience. And I think these are some challenges where we've opened up this space to a lot of private people, but we've really not encouraged them to foster excellence in the way we would like to. And just to close, I just want to spend a minute or two talking about Ashoka University, which is so I think based on some of these thoughts, do we have the kind of education for our people? Can we get excellence in the classroom? Now, some of us got together about 7 years ago to say, can we create an outstanding university coming out of India? And when we say what should be the architecture of such a university, we were clear on a few things. The first thing we were clear on is that I think the vision has to be large. You clearly have to be motivated by a desire to set up one of the most outstanding universities coming out of India. Number two, the classroom experience, the quality of the faculty has to define the academic curriculum. The university really has to be judged by the quality of faculty, not by the quality of infrastructure that is being put up, right? The classroom experience has to really define the university. So we really went out and recruited the best faculty we would get. We went and shared the vision with really the best academics that we could find. So we were able to get a Kaushik Basu or a Ramchandra Guha or a Andre Bete on one platform, saying that we will deliver an outstanding educational experience. Leveraging collaborations, I do feel that a lot of our curriculum is still rooted in traditionality. Now even something like a computer science, about which the country is crazy for, even if you look at our top curriculum across the IITs, the computer science is largely rooted in traditional systems or mathematics or algorithms. The computer science in the West is moving a lot towards social networks, digital media. I mean, I don't find universities here dealing with that kind of curriculum. Now, how can we bridge the gap? How can we really forge these partnerships to really get the best curriculum back here? And lastly, really innovating on curriculum. Now, if I look at the 4 things that a graduate today should have, I feel every graduate, and no matter whether you want to become a software engineer or a journalist, all of us want a graduate should be a great communicator. All of us want a graduate should be able to solve problems. All of us want that a graduate should be able to think critically. All of us want that our graduates should be socially responsible leaders. Now, but we are not training our graduates to be that, right? We are training our graduates to go through a curriculum and write an exam and score well. So I think innovating on curriculum has to be at the core of it. And I think that's how Ashoka got modeled and is getting created in the way it is getting created. And I do feel, for the sake of this country and the sake of our higher education, that this really becomes a model for higher education in the country. And the last thing I really want to talk about is governance. A lot of the private initiatives come up with the sole motive of profit, and I don't think profit is a bad word. I think, but governance which is broad-based, governance, as Amit pointed out, which focuses on education not for an ROI, but for delivering the highest quality experience. I think a governance has to come on those lines. And if we look across the world, if you look at institutions like a Harvard, Yale, Princeton, all of these institutions got created on a similar model. Collective philanthropy, broad governance, no one person really owning the university. I would just like to close my talk by going back to my first argument, where I said that the teacher has to be at the core of the education experience. And if we just look back and again step back, what has prevented us from doing that? I think what has prevented us from doing that is that we have to incentivize our teachers in a similar way as we incentivize some of our heroes. I think a teacher today in India has to have the same kind of excitement or the same kind of respect that a Sachin Tendulkar has. I think when we do that as a country, we will change higher education in India. Thank you.